want you to imagine that one morning you wake up, and as you stretch in your bed, your fingers graze your oak headboard, and suddenly, before your eyes, you see the tiniest acorn fall to the ground, sink into the earth, shoot up into a great oak, get cut down by industrial machinery, chopped into pieces, manufactured into a headboard, packaged, shipped, displayed, and purchased by you. This all happens in the scope of a few seconds. You start to think maybe you aren't quite awake. Maybe it was just a particularly vivid dream. But when you throw back your sheets, you're regaled with their entire journey from cotton seedlings in a field all the way to your mattress. By this point, you're understandably afraid to move, so you yell for a family member or loved one, instinctually reaching out for them as they come and rush in. And it happens again. Only this time, you're not watching their history. You're seeing it through their eyes. Every moment in their life as they saw it, every experience as they experienced it, all in the blink of an eye. It's all so much at once, and you find yourself unable to even explain to them what's happening, at least not without sounding insane. So you laugh it off. Must have been a bad dream. And you thank them when they offer to make you breakfast. Maybe getting something in your stomach will settle things down anyways. You keep your socks on as you make your way to the table to save yourself the life story of your floors and your carpets, and you pull back your chair with your foot before carefully sitting down. You decide just to use a single fork for everything that you're going to eat so that you don't have to learn more than you care to know about utensil production. Your plate is set before you, and your loved one or family member or roommate joins you. You smile and you thank them and say that you must have just been hungry. And then you make the mistake of taking a bite of bacon. And it happens again. What do you think you would see? What would you hear, smell, feel? What would it be like to see through the eyes of that pig? Just imagine the full scope of this. Every time you pick something up at the store, every piece of clothing you put on, every person whose hand you shake or hug, how would your understanding of the world and those around you change? How would it affect your food choices? My name is Emily Moran Barwick. I am an animal liberation activist, an artist, an educator, and a vegan. I created the YouTube channel and accompanying website BiteSizeVegan, where I educate people about veganism through a wide array of video styles covering a diverse range of subjects. In our time together today, I'm very likely going to challenge some of your lifelong beliefs. I'm going to ask you to set aside your preconceptions, suspend any certainties, and try to see with a fresh set of eyes that which you've never questioned, the everyday, ordinary, accepted aspects of your daily life. I'm aware that this is a great deal to ask of you, especially coming from a total stranger. I'm asking for your trust, and I haven't even earned it yet. But believe it or not, I am not here to force my beliefs upon you, to criticize your country, culture, traditions, religions, or beliefs. I'm not here to shame you or to shock you. I'm not even here to make you vegan. I won't pretend to have that power, and no one really makes any lasting change through force anyway. Today, I am simply here to show you what is going on every second of every day, all around the world, behind closed doors, including here in Ireland. I'm here to present evidence for your consideration that things may not be as they appear. Undoing a lifelong belief is no easy task, but in order to make informed decisions, to look ourselves in the mirror and ask if we are truly living the values that we purport to have, we must know the truth. We must educate ourselves about what is really going on, not rely on what we've been taught. We must make decisions based on fact, not fantasy. I want to preface this talk by saying that I'm going to be transparent with you. I'll even tell you if I don't know something. I will be focusing rather intensely on the situation here in Ireland. Now, I'm obviously not from here, and as much as I strive to be diligent in my research, it would be a grave misjudgment and incredibly presumptuous on my part to come here and tell you about your own country. especially on something so incredibly central to your country's history, economy, and culture as animal agriculture. The facts I'll present today are not of my own creation. I've sourced them from primarily Irish governmental and industry documents, the European Union, and many others. But you don't even have to believe me. I'm going to be providing you with a link to a resource sheet containing a full transcript of this talk with detailed citations for every fact I state, a full bibliography and additional resources so that you can dig deeper. We're only going to be able to barely scratch the surface in this brief window of time that we have together. So let's get started. For anyone unfamiliar with the term veganism, vegans do not eat, wear, or use anything that came from someone else's body. We don't eat meat, drink milk, or cheese. We don't consume eggs or honey. We don't wear leather, wool, silk, or down. We don't use products that were tested on animals or contain byproducts from their slaughter. And we don't attend circuses, zoos, aquariums, or any other event that exploits living beings for our entertainment and pleasure. Now, you may think this is an extreme way of life. Most people do. Maybe it seems unrealistic, unnatural, even dangerous. Perhaps a well-intended but misguided overreaction to isolated cases of animal cruelty. After all, most people identify as animal lovers. They don't want to cause the suffering and death of innocent beings any more than vegans do. But all those undercover videos of abuse and those horror stories of cruelty that you hear in the news, those are in America, right? Or China, or some faraway land, or a case of one corrupt individual giving all farmers a bad name, or the inevitable product of factory farms, big agribusiness and corporate greed. But it's not like that here. Here we have smaller farms, higher standards, better conditions, stronger regulations. Our farmers care about their animals. Maybe your family or you yourself are involved in some aspect of animal agriculture, and you find the claims of many animal activists objectionable, inflammatory, and completely out of line with your own practice. Or maybe the rolling green pastures that you drive past with peacefully grazing cows seem to be another world from the vegan arguments against beef and dairy. Or maybe you have a friend who raises their own chickens for eggs and treats them like family members, nothing like the tiny cages that you see in the media. Certainly there's a middle ground between systematic abuse and the extreme measures of veganism. A way of farming animals that's in line with the inherent values of humanity: stewardship, compassion, respect for life, humane treatment. Assuming that this is the case, how much do you know about the exact nature of these higher standards and stronger regulations, or even the origin of the animal or animal product on your table? Where were they born? How were they housed? How were they treated? How were they killed? Unfortunately, or you may think fortunately, the hypothetical exercise that we opened with is total fantasy. The vast majority of people possess very little to no knowledge of where their food comes from and how the individuals from whom it was taken were treated, including here in the Republic of Ireland and the whole of the EU. What we eat is such an accepted part of our everyday life that most of us have never even thought to question what we've been told. This isn't due to a lack of intelligence. This information is deliberately difficult to find. And even then, it's couched in euphemisms and dense legal language, which makes you wonder if there's really nothing wrong with how we breed, raise, and kill the animals that we eat. If it really is better here, why make such an effort? Today we're going to decode this language, look behind closed doors. We're going to take that figurative bite and see the history of the animals that we eat. And this is not just about them, but also the environment, our health, and the health of our family. You deserve to know the truth about what you're putting in your body, about what you're feeding your children. And you certainly deserve to know what you're paying others to do to animals in your name. Now, I'm not even talking about instances of overt abuse and neglect, which have and do occur in Ireland, because we all know that such cruelty is unacceptable. What we're going to focus on are the standard operating procedures and best practices. You may already be familiar with some of what I'm going to cover. Perhaps it's even part of your everyday week. But remember that today, it's about seeing these accepted conventions through new eyes, the animal's eyes, and questioning our mentality towards these beings. To this end, I'll be using terminology that you may find objectionable when applied to non-humans, perhaps overly anthropomorphic. This is a perfect example of our completely contradictory beliefs. Humane regulations are an inherent admission of an animal's ability to suffer and feel pain. So how can we claim that our standards are higher, our animals better treated, that they're healthy and happy, and then deny that they even possess these capacities when we're asked to see it from their perspective? We cannot have it both ways. So let's see how the vast majority of Ireland's population lives. The Republic of Ireland's human population is now over 4.7 million. Of course, this does not include the over 1.5 million pigs, 5 million sheep, almost 7 million cows, and 11 million chickens and other birds. As you are most likely aware, Ireland's main animal agricultural outputs are dairy and beef. However, the most highly consumed animal products in the Republic are pig meat and poultry. In fact, Ireland has one of the highest levels of poultry meat consumption within the EU at 32.8 kilograms per person, finally overtaking Irish per capita pig meat consumption by over a kilo. And believe it or not, at least according to the respective countries' statistics from 2014, Ireland's population consumed almost 7 kilos more poultry per person than the United States, and between 9 and 24 kilos more red meat, depending on the measurement parameters. It just so happens that the most highly consumed meats in Ireland are the most intensively farmed, though this can be easy to miss as the agricultural census groups pigs, poultry, horticulture, fruit, and mixed crops as other. Ireland's pig industry states in its own 2015 report that currently over 99% of Irish pigs are bred and reared in indoor, non-straw bedded, slatted, or solid floor systems. In 2003, the European Commission stated that while the majority of pigs for fattening are reared in units of 200 pigs or more, the industry in Ireland is characterized by units of more than 1,000. Within the pig industry worldwide, it's standard practice to process piglets, a perfect example of the euphemistic terminology with which we reduce animals, individuals, to inventory. It allows us to distance ourselves from our actions. During processing, baby pigs have their teeth cut out or ground, their ears sliced or pierced, their tails cut off, and boys have their testicles ripped out, all without anesthetic. While the Irish pig industry seems in favor of raising intact males, the Republic's laws explicitly permit unanesthetized castration, along with teeth and tail cutting of piglets under 8 days of age. Ear tagging, notching, or other lawful application of identification are permitted at any age on any animal. Baby pigs are killed before they're 6 months old, a decade before their natural lifespan. The brief time that they get to spend with their mother is through the thick metal bars of a farrowing crate. Nursing mothers are tightly confined, unable to turn around or even interact with their babies. Pigs are highly intelligent and incredibly social, ranking with primates in their level of social cognition. Mothers can recognize their piglets by sound alone, and they sing to their babies while nursing, referred to in studies, of course, as nursing vocalization. But despite their scientifically recognized array of complex emotions, piglets are separated from their mother within days or weeks of their birth, with Ireland specifying no earlier than 21 days. The sooner her babies are taken, the faster she can re-enter production. At her time of service, the astounding term for forceful penetration of her vagina with an instrument full of boar semen, she may be legally chained in place, one of the number of exceptions, allowing the tethered restraint of pigs. Tethering stalls as a whole, where pigs were chained in place all of the time, were outlawed by the EU in 1995. But as we'll continually see, with all regulations, this came with ample exceptions, loopholes, and a 10-year window for implementation. In 1991, 91% of Ireland's mother pigs were still confined to sow stalls or tethered. And when sow stalls, also known as gestation crates, were subsequently outlawed through a 2001 EU decision, again with ample fine print exceptions and only for a certain portion of their pregnancy, Ireland was one of 9 member states found to be non-compliant in 2013, with the European Commission stating that they'd had 12 years to ensure a smooth transition to the new system and implement the directive. Later that same year, the organization Compassion in World Farming released an undercover video from their investigation into 5 pig farms in Cork, Waterford, and Kerry, with one investigator stating, "These are the worst pig farms that we have seen in Europe, and the worst conditions that I have seen in years." They found pigs covered in their own excrement, relegated to filthy pens, cannibalizing dead pigs left in their pens out of boredom. Bins full of carcasses, weak and emaciated pigs left to die with open wounds, among other violations. Fearing that their findings were an indication of conditions within a large section of Irish pig farms, the organization noted how, ironically, as these investigations were taking place, Ireland held the EU presidency. And during their tenure, the Irish government made a show of taking the lead on animal welfare. Humane regulations do not equal humane treatment. As I mentioned earlier, there's a tendency to dismiss these kind of investigations as isolated incidents. 5 isolated incidents in this case. That's why I am laying out in such detail the exact nature of the highest standards available. Standards that reduce intelligent beings to machinery, that allow the repeat sexual exploitation and confinement of mothers, the mutilation of babies, the separation of families in order to churn out the next round of living products. If we look at Ireland's own portrayal of ideal conditions, images printed in their welfare guides, pig farms featured on Ear to the Ground, and make the effort to see with a fresh set of eyes, how can we call this humane treatment? If this is the highest standard, what is happening when the camera is not rolling? In this particular episode of Ear to the Ground, it perfectly illustrates our true motivation for enhanced welfare, allowing a few pigs access to the outdoors for the first time in their lives to see if this improves the flavor of their flesh and the price that their carcasses will fetch. Ireland's pig industry stakeholders in their own 2015 report cite animal health and welfare as major challenges and propose a financial incentive of €200 per sow for depopulation, meaning payment for killing and restocking their inventory. In 2015, 3.2 million pigs were killed in export-approved plants in Ireland. When we add the estimate for non-export approved plants and the 181,000 Irish pigs shipped alive to other countries, the body count climbs to 3.6 million. This does not include pigs destroyed for disease or depopulation, nor the worn-out mother sows killed when their production declines. Deemed unfit for human consumption, even in their deaths, these serially abused beings are denied any recognition of individuality. If we are capable of treating these social, intelligent, emotive beings who show affection and play in many of the same ways that our beloved canine companions do, with such malicious, selfish disregard, imagine what we're capable of doing to beings with whom we're less able to relate. 2015 was a banner year for the Irish poultry and egg industries, with rising global demands and domestic consumption. Along with poultry surpassing pig flesh as the most eaten meat in the country, Irish egg consumption and production also rose, with the nation's 240 egg producers churning out 281 million more eggs in 2015 than in 5 years prior. By sheer quantity alone, chickens are the most severely exploited of farmed land animals. Like the mother pigs of the pig industry, layer hens are imprisoned, used up, and thrown away when their bodies give out prematurely from the extreme demands of production. Hens lose vital nutrients every time their body forms an egg. Every aspect of their lives is regulated to ensure maximum output. From breeding them to produce eggs at an alarming, unnatural rate, to controlling their laying cycles with days and days of persistent light followed by long periods of complete darkness, to starving them for weeks at a time in an effort to force yet another egg cycle from their worn-out bodies, a process benignly referred to as induced molting. Of course, the EU essentially banned the complete removal of food and water in 1999. So instead of suffering up to 3 years of this brutality, European hens whose production has declined have the good fortune of being slaughtered around their first birthday. The vast majority of the world's more than 7 billion layer hens spend their abbreviated lives in cramped battery cages, unable to even extend their wings. Now, you may have heard the big fuss about the European Union's groundbreaking directive set in 1999 banning barren battery cages by 2012. From the media coverage, you would think that EU layer hens are living in luxury. But as we're seeing with humane regulations, the devil is truly in the details. In reality, the directive merely replaced barren battery cages with enriched, meaning furnished, battery cages. Reports extolled how hens would now be afforded 750 square centimeters each, neglecting the legislation's clarification that only 600 of these would be usable due to the furnishings, meaning that this most revolutionary advancement for the rights of layer hens granted them each an additional 50 square centimeters. Understanding the true impotence of this legislation makes its pathetic implementation all the more baffling. In 2012, 9 countries told the European Commission their farmers would not meet the deadline for conversion, with 4 additional countries saying that they were unlikely to be ready. These 13 countries had over 12 years to grant the laying hens they enslave a meager 50 square centimeters. And all the while the media celebrates the victory for animal welfare, the public eats more and more eggs, reassured by their higher standards. And the individuals that this entire charade is supposed to be for remain just as exploited. This is readily evident when we put a face to the figures. Meet Alice and Joy. They were both liberated with a few of their sisters from Irish egg farms and brought to Eden Sanctuary just outside of Dublin, where they walked on the grass and saw the sky for the first time in their life. Alice came from a battery cage farm. Joy came from an enriched cage farm. Eden's founder, Sandra Higgins, described in a report on the EU directive that the conditions in which Joy and her friends were imprisoned, stating a large number of them had extremely inflamed and swollen bodies, obviously stressed to the limit by the human demand for eggs. One hen was barely able to walk, her legs unable to keep her body upright because they were forced so wide apart from the swelling in her abdomen. Some had prolapsed from the effort of laying eggs, some died of egg peritonitis. Joy, like the others, was exceptionally light with a mere covering of skin and feathers over her sharp protruding keel, or breastbone. She had ammonia scalds on her skin. Apparently, they hadn't seen the news to know how fortunate they were to be living under the highest of standards. Confronted with this reality, most people propose a shift to free-range and cage-free facilities. But as we've seen, the only comfort these labels bring is to our own conscience. Cage-free birds are crammed into tiny sheds and have twice the mortality rate of battery-caged hens. They still have their sensitive beaks cut or burned off, and they still suffer the same predisposition to osteoporosis from their inbred overproduction of eggs, which, with their increased opportunity for movement, results in an increased incidence of fractures. Their bodies are their prisons. The most horrifying consequence of our perverse genetic manipulation is the fate of male layer chicks. We've optimized our machines, you see, and we've designed one kind of chicken for meat and another kind for eggs. Because of this, the egg industry produces billions of unwanted male baby chicks every year. To dispose of, as it's termed, these baby chicks, they are either painfully gassed, slowly suffocated in plastic bags, or they are ground up alive. This is standard practice all over the world, regardless of cage-free, free-range, and organic labels. The EU regulation under which Ireland operates lists maceration as the preferred method, specifying that chicks must be less than 72 hours old when they are killed. They are not even granted 3 days of life. Now, you won't find any mention of this barbaric practice in Ireland's newly implemented Animal Welfare Act or anything specifying methods of confinement and slaughter. And even if you manage to unravel the convoluted language and trace the overly complex changes in legislation enough to find what eventually became Part 7 of Schedule 5 of the Welfare of Farmed Animals Regulation, you'll find amongst a myriad of disturbing details of legalized murder, the permitted methods for the killing of chicks, cleanly laying out the proper way to grind up conscious, living, feeling, day-old babies. Of course, if you happen to look deeper and find that Schedule 5 was deleted in its entirety in 2013, you may understandably assume that chick disposal was abolished. In reality, the reason that Ireland's new Welfare Act seems so sterile is that it simply defers the gruesome details to the EU regulations and Ireland-specific supporting statutory instruments. I hope by now that my initial claims that we can't trust what we are told are sounding slightly less like a conspiracy theory. If you wonder why this hasn't been exposed in the news, it has. And every time, people are appalled, outraged, disgusted. They wonder how any person or industry could be so barbaric, and they continue to eat eggs, not realizing that they have just answered their own question. The European Commission estimates that the EU kills 330 million chicks every year, with global estimates at 3.2 billion. The chickens that Ireland raises in the meat industry aren't any better off, bred to grow at such alarming rates that they collapse under their own weight before being sent to slaughter at only 5 to 6 weeks old. In 2015, Ireland killed a record 80.3 million chickens in approved export plants alone. Ireland's Safe Food Review not only describes in detail how Irish chickens are hung upside down and dragged through electrified water baths, but also addresses the health impact on the human population. Campylobacter is the most common cause of bacterial gastroenteritis in Ireland, with the highest burden seen in children under 5. In 2008, of the broiler chicken carcasses inspected from Ireland, 98% were contaminated with Campylobacter. That same year, Ireland had the most outbreaks of cryptosporidosis and E. coli in the entire EU and EEA. And I'm sure you're familiar with bovine spongiform encephalopathy or mad cow disease, which brings us, finally, to the most iconic and most profitable sectors of Ireland's animal agriculture: dairy and beef. As we saw, Ireland is home to over 6.3 million cows. 1.7 million were slaughtered in factories and abattoirs in 2015, with total disposals, as it's termed, reaching nearly 2.1 million. But these numbers say little about the lives of these beings. We all know milk comes from cows. We may think they have a constant supply of milk, or that they even need to be milked to relieve the pressure. But cows are mammals, just like us. They produce milk for one reason: to feed their babies. Cows carry their babies for 9 months, just like we do. They lactate to feed their babies, just like we do. And after weaning, they stop producing milk, just like we do. So in order to have a constant supply of cow's milk for human consumption, we need a constant supply of pregnant cows. In the dairy industry, as we've seen with mother pigs, cows are repeatedly subjected to what we call artificial insemination. But were we to awake in the condition of our imaginary scenario and take a sip of milk and see the same experience from the cow's perspective, we'd not hesitate a moment to call it rape. Cows are restrained, anally penetrated by the inseminator's arm and vaginally penetrated by the semen-containing rod. Aside from the emotional trauma of this experience, cows often sustain internal injuries, which is why artificial insemination training on female cows in slaughterhouses is gaining popularity. After all, any damage to a working cow would slow down production, but what's another violation when they'll be dead soon anyways? No matter where she's raised or how she's housed, when a dairy cow gives birth, her baby is taken away. We can't have them sucking up all of the profits, after all. Animal Health Ireland's handy calf care guide advises that dairy calves should be removed from their dams, meaning mothers, immediately after birth, and hand-fed colostrum, which is the very first milk that all mothers produce, containing important antibodies. They go on to explain that the dairy calf is going to be separated from the cow anyways, as dairy cows are not bred for their mothering abilities. They cite lower quality of their colostrum. Not only does this negate the emotional devastation of having child after child taken away, but it even uses the consequences of our own exploitation as the means of justification. Cows bond intensively with their calves, and they'll cry for days when they are taken. A former cattle rancher friend of mine turned vegan when she witnessed her cows chasing the trailer as it took their children away. She says they cried for days and they only stopped when they lost their voices. This is not anthropomorphizing. It's a mother's grief, and it's absolutely heartbreaking to watch. If her baby is male, he is sent to a VEAL farm where he's tied down, unable to move, or locked in a cage where he cannot even turn around until he's slaughtered when he's only still a few weeks old. VEAL, an industry that even many meat eaters oppose, would not exist without dairy. Every cup of yogurt, every scoop of ice cream, every glass of milk is directly connected to the deaths of those baby calves. Of course, the dairy calves of Ireland are shipped to other countries to meet their fate. Female calves are doomed to suffer the same fate as their mothers, whose worn-out bodies give out around 4 or 5 years of age, despite their natural lifespan of 20 years or more. They're sent to slaughter for cheap meats and pet food, deemed unfit for human consumption. At the slaughterhouse, many of these mothers face their final and most brutal separation from yet another child. While formal statistics are difficult to obtain, as most studies focus on the economic cost of fetal wastage, accounts range from approximately 10 to 70% of cows arriving at the slaughterhouse pregnant. Ireland's welfare laws allow the unanesthetized castration of cows up to 6 months of age with a bordizo or a rubber ring around their scrotum up to 8 days of age, as well as the painful removal of their horns up to 15 days. Of course, Ireland's Farm Animal Welfare Advisory Council recommends these procedures not be carried out simultaneously with the weaning of beef calves, stating that weaning of the suckled calf from its mother can be particularly stressful for both the cow and her calf. Their dairy brochure offers a single bullet point that weaning of calves should be done with the minimum of stress. An EU audit encompassing only a fraction of the Irish dairy farms between 2012 and 2014 found up to 70 welfare violations per year, stating that the most frequently detected in bovine animals is mutilation, and that despite corrective measures, the number of mutilation non-compliances detected from 2012 to 2014 remained stable. These living beings aren't meant to be production machines. Dairy cows are prone to infections from frequent milkings and are often pumped full of antibiotics and growth hormones which seep into their milk. Even here in Ireland, there is an official number of pus cells allowed in milk, euphemistically referred to as the somatic cell count. In the United States, 750,000 pus cells are allowed in every milliliter, with the EU specifying 400,000 and Brazil allowing 1 million. Yes, Ireland's dairy and beef cattle are largely pasture-raised and on much smaller farms than industrial production, but even that's changing. With the end of the milk quotas, one of Ireland's largest dairy farmers said that in order to compete, the dairy farm of the future is going to have to be bigger. And for the cow, the pig, chicken, duck, turkey, for the lamb or the sheep, they don't know the name of the company or the person enslaving them. They don't know what size the farm is or in what country. They are just as robbed of their rights and their lives regardless of the location. Our rationalizations and justifications are of no use to those whom we exploit, with some of our most impressive mental gymnastics, which would be admirable if it wasn't so horrific. We say that this barbaric mutilation, this conversion of living beings from some ones to some things, is for their own good. Because if we don't clip their teeth or cut their beaks or slice their tails, they'll attack and chew on each other. What we failed to mention is that these behaviors are stress responses to confinement and overly crowded, insanity-inducing conditions. If we didn't put them in these abusive conditions, they wouldn't react the way that they do. But we humans love to play the role of savior in the disasters of our own creation. We swoop in to milk the cow and relieve the painful pressure of her swollen udder, pressure that wouldn't exist had we not taken her child away. We've spent all of this time looking at the treatment of animals in Ireland, but the truth is, Ireland exports the vast majority of its outputs, including 90% of the beef and around 85% of the dairy. In addition, thousands of live cows, pigs, chickens, sheep, lamb, and unweaned calves, babies that we've stolen from their mothers, are shipped out of Ireland on extended, terrifying journeys to other countries through all manner of weather extremes. If they manage to survive the journey, they're either fattened up for slaughter, or in the case of veal calves, confined and slaughtered, or simply killed immediately. Ireland's transport reports show regular violations of animal welfare regulations, with Ireland as a whole receiving a formal notice from the EU in 2011. And when these beings arrive at their final destination, the nature of their treatment and their deaths are out of Irish hands. Undercover investigations continue to expose brutal abuse of these imported animals. Ireland ships living beings across the EU as well as to destinations like Tunisia, Libya, Morocco, Kosovo, Albania, Rwanda, China, and the Ukraine. But what about the animals you eat? How are they treated? Looking again at what's eaten the most, 60% of pig meat and 90% of chicken consumed in Ireland are imported. Another Safe Food report found that the majority of Ireland's population had a very low awareness as to the actual source of their food, illustrating how a single piece of Hawaiian pizza processed and packaged in the Republic of Ireland would have ingredients from at least 19 countries. Ireland is home to multiple multinational corporations, with the world's largest beef producer, JBS, recently relocating their headquarters to the Republic amidst criminal proceedings for violating Brazilian laws. In surveying and observing Irish consumers, Safe Food found that while many aspired to be healthy, economical, and to support the domestic market, this did not follow through to their purchasing behavior. It was observed that there is a marked difference between consumers' attitudes and their behaviors. This finding was echoed in an EU study on an awareness of slaughter regulations, with the majority of Irish consumers unaware of the details or even whether regulations exist. And just 2 out of 13,500 respondents from across the EU citing animal welfare at slaughter as a consideration in their meat purchases, with the main driving force being quality and price. Once again, money trumps ethics. Yes, the industry keeps the truth deliberately hidden, but to be honest, most of us prefer not to know. We say we love animals, but it is impossible to love someone and profit from their death. Of course, farmers take care of their animals, but we only need to look at the language to see that it is not compassion. It's maintenance of inventory. We even limit the parameters of their so-called legal protection by the bottom line of cost. We amass mountains of paperwork, conduct thousands of studies, spend untold amounts of money, form governmental, institutional, and industry panels, all to decide, define, and decree the right way to rape, confine, mutilate, kidnap, and kill. I mean, it's really absurd when we step back and think about it. Do we have manuals on how to humanely rape humans? Or how to compassionately kidnap or ethically rob? Of course not, because those are oxymorons. They cannot coexist. But when it comes to our treatment of animals, we will bend over backwards and create massive paper trails of regulations to feel good about what we are doing. We turn these living beings into data points, flowcharts, and percentages, calculate to a decimal point certainty the exact cost of every aspect of their lives and the details of their death. We relegate the annual mass murder of over 3 billion day-old conscious, innocent babies to a footnote in a study conducted for the welfare regulations we are so graciously creating. We deem them legally sentient, deserving freedom from hunger, thirst, discomfort, pain, injury, disease, fear, distress, and mental suffering as the EU did. And then we use this very recognition of their capacity to feel the same emotions and sensations as we do to design in language so disturbingly detached it is nothing short of sociopathic the exact manner in which we may legally violate, imprison, cut, burn, alter, and murder them. This is how profoundly illogical our thinking is when it comes to animals. It goes against all basic human understanding. Knowing better but doing wrong anyways is worse than having no knowledge. Yet we have the audacity to hold this legislative recognition of non-human sentience on high as a giant step forward for the rights of animals, as if systematically exploiting individuals with fully admitted knowledge and comprehension of their capacity to suffer is something to commend. And look what we offer ourselves as evidence of progress. One news report extolled the reduction in animals slipping and falling on their way to slaughter in one abattoir in one country. When we look at our actions from the other side, the perversity and the absurdity of our deluded self-congratulations is astounding. If you were in the place of these beings, how grateful would you feel to your captor if they laid down a bath mat on the ramp to your execution? Is this really the best we have to offer? Being the most courteous murderers, the most considerate rapists, pouring untold resources into these convoluted laws and regulations, all the while completely blind to the fact that there is another option entirely. One that we don't have to manipulate our values to justify. One we don't have to couch in euphemistic terms or bury beneath incomprehensibly dense legislation. One that allows us to finally align our actions with our values and become the people that we believe ourselves to be. Good people, kind people, animal lovers, stewards to this earth and its inhabitants. Before we address very briefly issues of the environment and health, I'm going to play a short video. While I've included footage on your resource page of the undercover investigation into Irish pig farms and the brutal abuse and prolonged slaughter of live exports, I decided to take a different approach today. The video I'm going to play only includes footage of government-sanctioned conditions and practices, all completely legal here in Ireland. If it really is better here, we should have no objection to watching. If you feel that you must turn away, I would just ask you to think on the question, if I can't watch the process, do I have a right to eat the product?
Balance of the bump, yeah.
In my years of being vegan and speaking with many, many non-vegans, I have yet to ever hear one reason that even comes close to justifying putting a sentient being through what we just saw. Not one. You cannot watch that and say that animals that we kill for our food don't know any better, that they die peacefully and humanely. They can sense the fear. They can smell the blood, and they fight. They fight to the end. And you can't say that it's happening in some faraway place because it's happening all over the world. The CO2 chambers that you saw, those are the medieval devices, lowering pigs to an extraordinarily painful death of burning from the inside out. That is seen as the most humane method of slaughtering pigs. It's employed worldwide, including here in Ireland. The EU, in its groundbreaking legislation, recommended phasing out the use of carbon dioxide, but said the impact assessment revealed such recommendations were not economically viable at present. Interestingly enough, Butina, the company that manufactures the very chambers you saw in that video, and the ones operating here in Ireland, was one of the stakeholders involved in that assessment. It's the absurdity of murderers deciding how they're allowed to murder. As we saw with the disease outbreaks, this is not just the animals' welfare that's compromised. In Ireland, just like the United States, heart disease is the #1 killer. We've long had proof that a balanced vegan diet can prevent and even reverse heart disease. 74% of men and 57% of women in Ireland were overweight or obese in 2010, with the World Health Organization designating Ireland as the leader of Europe's obesity crisis, with almost the entire adult population predicted to be overweight or obese by 2030. More than 1 in 4 children in Ireland are overweight or obese, with a safe food study finding 61% getting insufficient dietary fiber, 40% exceeding recommendations for dietary fat, and all of them exceeding salt intake by 50%, specifying that processed meats made a major contribution to the salt content of the children's diets, the very kind of meat that the WHO has designated as a Class 1 carcinogen. We're taught that animal products are necessary for protein, vitamin D, B12, iron, and other nutrients, but these foods are a package deal, inseparable from their disease-promoting components. I've included more in-depth information on health and nutrition on your resource page, as well as a link to a free, comprehensive guide to going vegan from Eden Farm Sanctuary's Go Vegan World campaign. But I want to speak very briefly to fishing and the environmental impact of animal agriculture. Whether you eat fish and marine life or not, this matter impacts all of us. The ocean, or rather the phytoplankton within the ocean, provides somewhere between 50 and 80% of our oxygen, and the ocean's ecosystems store carbon in massive quantities. We are destroying the very lungs of our planet with the delusion of sustainable fishing. Setting aside all arguments for animal ethics, the destructive nature of animal agriculture and the environmental crisis at hand should be on the forefront of Ireland's agenda. To protect and preserve the incredible landscape of this country, in which its citizens take well-deserved pride. And while Ireland is the first country to implement a nationwide sustainability program, it unfortunately mirrors all of the major green initiatives and governmental panels the world over, proposing and celebrating symbolic gestures, essentially applying a media-friendly Band-Aid to a severed limb. Animal agriculture accounts for 34% of Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions in 2013, the single largest contributing sector. It's responsible for 97.5% of ammonia, 89.2% of methane, and 94% of nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas that is 296 times more destructive than carbon dioxide and which stays in the atmosphere for 150 years. Ireland had the 4th highest greenhouse gas emissions per capita in 2011. The National Competitiveness Council reported in 2008 that the ROI was one of the highest carbon emitters on a per capita basis in the OECD, utilizing less than half the OECD average of renewable resources, with no waste to energy conversion, stating the least preferred waste solution from an environmental perspective dominates in Ireland. Their subsequent 2015 scorecard showed Ireland's environmental performance, EPI score, and rate of improvement still lagging behind OECD average, with particularly poor performance in relation to biodiversity and protection of habitats, fisheries, and water sanitation. Keep in mind, this is the impact of the iconic grass-fed, pasture-raised Irish agriculture. As it is, EPA documents show time and again the waste lagoons from pig and dairy farms and wastewater from rendering plants contaminating Ireland's protected waters, and the mislabeling or non-compliant handling of SRM materials, meaning remains that are at risk of contaminating with mad cow disease, directly threatening the public health. The Irish Times reported the increasing environmental devastation of New Zealand's dairy practice, saying how that country was often held up as an example of what Ireland could have been if the milk quotas had not pulled the handbrake on their growth. 20 days later, the quota was lifted. Even if this approach was the ideal that we hold it up to be, we simply do not have the land for the number of animals that we eat every year. The amount of land that it takes to produce 37,000 pounds of plant foods will only yield 375 pounds of meat. And you can grow 15 times more protein on any given area of land with plants versus animals. We have environmentally reached the point beyond personal choice. Beyond you eat how you want to eat and I'm going to eat how I'm going to eat. This is a global crisis. It's not about you and it's not about me anymore. We say that the children are our future, but what future can they have when we are eating the planet to death? The world cannot sustain meat, dairy, and egg production. It simply can't. We have to start aligning our actions with our values. I understand that animal agriculture is more deeply rooted in Irish culture than I can possibly comprehend. An enormous source of pride for your country, which is all the more reason to take action. Far from contradictory, offensive, disrespectful, or extreme, the principles and practices of veganism are the best hope for healing our planet and preserving the beauty and history of countries like Ireland. And in making this shift, we will need farmers more than ever, those who know the land when so many of us find it foreign. We're going to rely on them for our food as much as we ever have. We cannot justify what we do to animals out of tradition. Our traditions do not alleviate their suffering, and our customs do not dictate the value of someone else's life. Traditions can be wrong, and customs can be cruel. There are many atrocities in the history of humanity that we now look upon with disgust and disbelief at what used to be commonplace. And you don't even have to give up taste or even your favorite foods. These days, there exist vegan alternatives for virtually every meat, cheese, dairy creation, even eggs. And you can find recipes online for making your own versions if the ready-made alternatives aren't available in your area or they're too expensive. Veganism, far from being an extreme lifestyle, a threat to tradition, is the most sane and rational way to live. It's the most powerful tool we have for saving our planet, for improving our health when we eat health consciously, and for regaining our compassion, for becoming those people that we believe ourselves to be, good people. And good people don't destroy the planet, leaving our children without a future. Good people don't throw newborn babies into grinders. Good people don't rip day-old babies away from their mothers. Good people don't rape, torture, and murder. Yet good people everywhere are doing all of these things with every bite of every meal. But that's the beauty here. You no longer have to buy into this lie. You decide what goes into your body. You decide whether you want to continue to have others kill for you. You decide whether you want to continue consuming death, terror, and heartbreak. You have the information at your feet. The responsibility now lies in your hands. You decide. And my hope is you'll decide to go vegan. Thank you.